it's going to take weeks, they say, to start fulfilling all these SNAP benefits and the rest. So we're looking at a moment in which we kind of tear the covers off the bed to see the state of our economy. How would you describe it?
We have two economies today. We have one that is intensely market-driven for those at the top, which is extraordinary. They are spending like there's no tomorrow. Meanwhile, for those at the bottom, they're not sure how they're going to make it through the day. And so that disparity shows up in all sorts of data, in corporate anecdotes, in earnings reports. And it's troubling to me, not solely from an economic perspective, but what it says in terms of sentiment. Because we have a small group of Americans who feel invulnerable. At the same time, we have this sea of mounting despair. And we talk, and I know you talk a lot left and right as being the biggest divisions in America. It's not. Our biggest division is up and down, and no more so than measured in terms of the confidence people feel.
How about that? It's not left and right, it's up and down. And you have an administration that's largely populated with people who are up.
Yes.
Does that matter?
Yes, it does. Because one of the I think unappreciated elements that happened during COVID is the top stopped interacting with those at the bottom. People started to work from home. In fact, it was that work from home divergence that first drew my attention, because I saw white-collar workers immediately feeling better, while blue-collar workers continued to struggle. Hospital workers, factory workers, supermarket clerks. And those at the top don't see those at the bottom. We don't go to church together. We aren't involved in civic organizations together. We barely ride the subway together. And so those at the bottom have an intense awareness of what's going on above. But I don't think those above really appreciate the despair at the bottom.
You used the word despair a couple of times as the president describes this as the greatest economy in history. And we don't have a lot of data to put to this right now because the government is closed. And there are questions about what we're going to learn when the government reopens, BLS starts cranking out data again. So let's stick with the anecdotal, because this new poll from Bloomberg Harris is striking, to think that this many people are worried about losing their jobs. What's prompting the fear?
So if you go back to April, one consistent message we heard from CEOs when the tariff tantrum hit was they were going to control the controllables. I think it was the CEO of Norfolk Southern who said that. So you think about, if I'm a CEO of a business, what do I control? I control corporate investment and I control hiring. And so they immediately pulled back on the hiring front, looking for certainty. And here we are 6 months later, and the tariff question still remains. So the all clear sign hasn't come into the full economy other than at the very top with AI.
With AI, which is eliminating jobs.
Which is eliminating jobs.
And adding to the agita at the bottom.
Sure. And you see that not just at the bottom, but you see that with entry-level workers coming right out of college. You know, I teach at William & Mary, and so you hear from students, AI has gone from being this big opportunity to being a threat.
How about that? To college students.
Who
are studying economics.
And studying data science.
Yeah.
They now appreciate that employers are holding back on job offers because they believe that AI will fill the void.
Well, so the job market and the weakness that we're seeing is supposed to justify at least another interest rate cut. Do you support that view?
No.
You don't?
I don't, because we have two economies today. The bottom economy, yes, it supports a cut, but appreciate that the consumer is unlikely to see that in their credit card loan rates or even their car loan rates. Meanwhile, if we lower the cost of funding for those at the top, all we do is to make it cheaper to speculate. And we already see an explosion in option volume and leverage in the market to begin with. And so I think we have to realize that the K-shaped economy puts monetary policymakers in a real box.
Mm-hmm. So it increases speculation at the top. It doesn't loosen the housing market, for instance, or have any positive impact at the bottom.
It does, but appreciate that if you look at the inventory data. So Connor Sen, who's a reporter for Bloomberg, and I were exchanging data. If you look at lower income neighborhoods, they're awash in inventory for sale. And so it's questionable if you don't have a job, a lower interest rate isn't going to help you on a mortgage you're not going to qualify for.
How about that? That is an underreported story.
I think it is too.
And it speaks to the K-shaped economy. Nobody even knows that this inventory is available in a neighborhood like that because they're not shopping there. Kevin Hassett's going to be speaking in about 10 minutes. This is partly why we wanted you to join us, to help us walk into this conversation. You sit down with David Rubenstein, you never know what's going to come up. But I suspect they're going to get to inflation. And this idea that tariffs are not inflationary, which the administration has spoken to at length, and we've heard from everybody from Kevin Hassett to Joe Lavorgna on this program, Scott Besant, have diligently made that case. And they say, well, it's a one-time shift in pricing, and we need tariffs on a national security level. What does that mean if you're on the wrong side of the K?
Economists spend an awful lot of time talking about annual changes in inflation, and it drives me nuts because the consumer eats the cumulative effect. And if you look at the cumulative effect, particularly on food prices since COVID, it's a staggering number, particularly for those at the bottom. And inflation is not just an economic experience for those at the bottom, it's a psychological one, and is on top of other ways they already feel vulnerable. So as much, I don't pay a lot of attention to whether tariffs will be inflationary or not. I see the impact already in the data on how people feel.
Got it. There's an argument, however, between hard data and anecdotal data that this White House has used to make its argument. When do we start seeing CPI jumping off the charts the way so many predicted?
You know, I'm not sure when that will be.
So this is the frog in the boiling pot.
It's the frog in the boiling pot, but I would argue that the cumulative impact since COVID hit already has the water boiling for those at the bottom.
Yeah, sure, right.
And they don't have the discretionary income. They don't have the savings to be able to afford that. And I think you really saw that with all of the SNAP benefit anxiety. I mean, the searches for food bank open near me have just skyrocketed. And that says the bottom is not good.
Yeah. What happens if the president sends $2,000 checks to everybody, the pocket dividend he's talking about?
You know, on the surface, that looks great. But let's look at the COVID experience with what happened.
We know about getting checks.
They flow through the lower consumer to the lower consumer's lender. It helps them to become more current on their auto loan. It helps them to become current on their credit card loan.
And people at the top just save it?
And people at the top just save it.
And that's not growth.
No, and for the bottom, they're a conduit. They're not in a position to create savings out of this. And we've hollowed out enough of the middle class that it becomes really concentrated savings among those at the top.
This is really instructive because when the consumer gives up, that's when the economy gives up. Do you see a recession in the next year?
No. What's so interesting is I refer to our current economy as a jenga tower. It's top heavy.
Yeah.
And so the bottom economy is already in recession. Those blocks are being pulled out left and right. At the top, it's booming. And so I care less about what happens to economic growth at the bottom today than I do at the top. We like to joke that the markets are not the economy, but we've reached a point where the economy now is the markets.
Wow.
And so what happens to the financial markets is likely to have a supersized experience on what we see in terms of economic growth.
Well, now I'm starting to get scared because you look at that column about the so-called NVIDIA state in the Atlantic recently, or you consider what happened yesterday is just CoreWeave had a little sniffle and the market had a very nervous reaction. This idea of circular investing or a house of cards that is the AI race, and I'm not calling it that, by the way, but a lot of people are growing concerned that there's very little propping up this economy.
But the circularity is bigger than that because it flows all through those at the top. You know, when you have the head of Delta announcing that for the first time in its history, it will earn more revenue from the front of the plane than the back of the plane.
How about that?
That's saying that we have an economy that is unknowingly very dependent on a very few wealthy individuals.
The essence of a services-based economy with a small pocket of extreme wealth.
Yes.
So what happens to the rest of the economy if the K keeps going in both directions?
Well,
at some point, this is unsustainable, right?
It is, and you're starting to see the consequences politically. Affordability, it has jumped to the headlines just like the K-shaped economy, and that's to me isn't surprising. But what it says is there is a potential, and I think we saw this with the election in New York City, that voters move not left or right, but move down. That progressivism is what begins to appeal. And we saw this if you looked at the relationship between consumer confidence and Bernie Sanders' popularity in 2016. You saw that as mood fell, he became more popular, and so did Donald Trump.
I was going to say, this is the Trump effect as well.
It is the Trump effect. So you end up with anti-establishment, populist, potentially progressive. And I think politicians on both sides of the aisle underappreciate the consequences when you get somebody named Bob or Joe or Ann from Kentucky who can coalesce those at the bottom, left and right. The bottom is purple. And I think both parties like to suggest it's one or the other. No, it's purple. And increasingly, it's even more purple because of the rage that is felt.
Wow. So you could extend that to believe or suggest that Zoran Mamdani's base has more in common with the MAGA base than it realizes.
Absolutely. And
is that how we reconcile this gap?
Yeah, I saw him as a symbol of a move down. And it's not alone. We see this across Europe. We see this in other states. Those who are young and unemployed are excited by this. At the same time, it will have appeal to those at the bottom, left and right, because in many ways, they now feel betrayed by our two establishment parties. One of the most disheartening things for me as somebody who's been writing about this for 5 years is that those who are best in a position to do something about this seem disinterested and unwilling. And that hasn't gone unnoticed, particularly in the last couple of weeks, given the ping pong ball that was SNAP benefits.
Well, you know, so we're going to be hearing, I guess, momentarily from Kevin Hassett and David Rubenstein. What do you make of this? Everyone's calling you right now. You didn't put out a news release or hire an agent. Everyone realized that this K-shaped economy was something that we need to address once again.
Yes, I think this is a tipping point. This is like Tom Hanks getting COVID, where suddenly the crowd went from not being concerned to being extremely concerned.
Wow.
That this is so ubiquitous,
yes,
so easily explained to anyone, cautions to me that the gap has become too great. And now the question is, how does it close? And I would encourage those in policy making to think thoughtfully about that, because if they fail to do that, we know that shared despair leads people to come together across history.